So yeah, welcome everybody once again to Real World Co-Intelligence Community Learning Call. I can see there's a couple of new people here today, so just for your benefit, just to let you know a little bit about the Co-Intelligence Institute. Basically, Co-Intelligence Institute is looking at the question of collective wisdom and our capacity to work well together to co-create a world that works for all. That's the tagline we have on our website. We're looking at how we create collective wisdom, about ways that we can use that wisdom to create better societies for everybody and for future generations. And so this is our monthly learning call, and this is designed to highlight the connections between the work of specific practitioners and some of the ideas, visions, and framework of the ideas of co-intelligence and of wise democracy. So each month we're reaching out to different practitioners that inspire us, that we feel have done something that highlights aspects of co-intelligence or wise democracy. We get an opportunity to explore their work together. And I guess these calls are really all about learning and learning together. So it's an opportunity for the practitioner to share their work and for us to learn about their work, to ask questions, but also to go further and develop ideas and, you know, have generative conversations. So that's a little bit about the call itself. So I'm going to hand over to Rosa, who will talk about the process, and will introduce our special guest today, who is Shamichael Hallman. So over to you, Rosa.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy. Yeah, I have the great honor of introducing Shamichael Hallman. Shamichael is a very distinguished and accomplished person. So he worked as the overseer of renovating the Cosset Library in Memphis. And so that was part of this movement of reimagining the Civic Commons. And he's currently a fellow at the design school at Harvard, and many other accomplishments to boot. And in a moment, when we go over to him, he'll be able to say more about anything I have left out that you feel is helpful for our participants here to know about your background as a civic tech innovator, etc. So I just, before turning it over to our honored guest presenter for today, I want to say a little bit about the framework. Shamichael's going to be speaking for about 20 minutes, doing intro to the case study that he's going to be sharing with us today. And then we're going to have a participant round where we're going to hear your questions, your comments, how this is landing for you. But it's not going to be Q&A back and forth. We're going to do a round and kind of hear from a couple of different people. And then we're going to go back to Shamichael. So now that he sees how things are landing for you, what kind of questions you have, et cetera, he'll have another 20 minutes to speak to the various topics that you've raised. At that point, then Tom will have an opportunity to talk about the various wise democracy pattern language patterns that he sees as being pertinent and relevant here. And then all of you will have another round to offer some comments, thoughts, etc. And then we will close with some closing comments by Tom and by Shamichael. So that's the format for today. And with that, over to you, Shamichael. We are so happy to have you here with us.
Thanks so much. Is everyone able to hear me? Good. Wow, it is a real honor to be with you all. I am just, this morning I was, you know, and I think I was telling Rosa and Andy some time ago, like I've just been trying to start morning in a posture of gratitude. And I just took out some time today to just say how thankful I was and am to be with you all. And so it's just really exciting. As Rosa said, my name is Shamichael Hallman, currently doing a 1-year mid-career fellowship at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard, with a wonderful cohort of 8 other folks who are shaping the built environment in some way. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing. I do want to say just a huge thanks to Rosa. She and I were on a call together in December, or maybe early December. The American Academy of Arts and Sciences had a 3-day session on reinventing American democracy. And I spoke on one of those days, particularly around the public library efforts to be involved in civic education. And then a few weeks later, she and I and Andy had this really great call that I still sort of get chills about as I think about it. It just felt like a really wonderful call. And then that ultimately led to a call with Tom. And y'all, Tom, is something interesting about Tom. First off, we had just a very long conversation. I mean, it was, man, Tom, we talked almost 2 hours, I think. And I feel like we probably could have talked 2 more hours and have not have exhausted anything. But throughout the conversation, Tom was referencing books and said, hey, have you heard of this book? Have you heard of this book? Well, I've got this resource for you, you know. And at the end of the call, he said, I'm going to send you something. I'm going to send you a packet of things that would be maybe helpful for you along your journey. And I don't know about you all, but generally when someone says me that, I expect them to do it. But I generally okay, it may take them a couple of days. It may take them a week or so, you know, to find everything and get to the post office and wrap it up and send it. But man, I got a package from Tom like 2 days after we got off the phone call. I said, man, who is this guy? It's like a ninja or something. Like, just had this box ready to go, and it was really wrapped well. And so, Tom, I just want to say publicly, say thank you for your generosity. You don't always meet people who will pause from what they're doing and be kind to you. So thank you for that. So my time here at Harvard, I am spending most of it, not all, but most of it thinking about the public library, particularly thinking about both the social and the civic impact of the public library. And when I say civic impact, it's essentially this. So the library project that I've been a part of in Memphis, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a bit, there were a couple of goals that we were trying to ensure were embedded in the project. And one of those goals was civic engagement. So this sort of the degree to which people sort of saw themselves as civic agents through the work of the public library. And I was able to do a number of programs and initiatives around that. But one of the most important things I think that I was able to do was I started reaching out to librarians all across the country. I call libraries large and small, urban, rural, suburban, academic and research libraries, public libraries, even one military library. And I asked them, what are you know, if you hear the word, as you hear the word democracy, as you hear the word civic, what's happening within your brains? Like what are you doing, you know? And people start telling me all sorts of really, really amazing things that I'm trying to compile into something that makes sense now. But through the help of a good friend at the New York Public Library, now categorizing these into 3 buckets. The first bucket is civic education. This is the degree to which the library, through its collection development, through its resources, through its programs, through its community outreach, is educating the community on just sort of how their community runs, like how this is what's happening at local government. These are the people that you are electing for office. This is what they're supposed to be doing. Here's how you can keep them accountable. If you ever need to reach out to them, here's how you can do that. In some cases, the library is hosting conversations where they're bringing in the mayor, they're bringing in the alderman, the city council person, and having these town hall conversations around things that the community feels are important. The library is in other cases curating books. They're doing book displays that have a variety of fiction and nonfiction books that talk about how people show up in their community. Right? So that's sort of the civic education bucket. There's another bucket that is what I call civic behavior, and this is sort of citizenship as a verb. And this is, again, the public library through its outreach, through its collections, through its programming, working to help the community understand citizenship as a verb, right? Like the ways that we can show up in our communities, whether that's through voting, whether that's through running for office, whether that is through joining a nonprofit board, whether that is, even very simple things such as you're at the public park and you see some trash on the ground, being responsible, picking it up and maybe sending a message to the parks folks and saying, hey, the park seems to be a little trashy today. I picked the trash up today, but you may want to send somebody this way, right? And then this third bucket of civic attitudes, and this is the library's work to sort of push forth and advocate for values around tolerance, around equity, around belonging, as opposed to othering. And this is where I'm spending quite a bit of time right now, because I think, particularly in this moment in time in our country, as we are perhaps as polarized, as isolated, as divided as we have ever been, that we need opportunities to come together, to be with one another, to wrestle with things, to have shared experiences together. And I think in terms of indoor public spaces, that it is the public library that is perhaps our country's greatest asset, and its ability to bring people from vastly different backgrounds together, right? And the work that I have been doing alongside some really wonderful folks, leadership at Memphis Public Libraries and some other really great people, we've really been testing out that concept. We've really been trying to push that forward, really trying to explore the public library as a site of encounter, to say how might we, through our programming, through our marketing, through our outreach, through our hiring, through our policies, how might we get to a place where we become even more public than we are right now? What are the sort of levers that we need to pull to ensure that people in any given community, regardless of how much money they have, regardless of where they slept last night, regardless of their political ideology, how might we create a space where those folks feel welcome? And to build on that, what actually happens? What would actually happen if all those people showed up? If on any given day, if every sort of segment, every sort of portion of the community happened to show up on the same day at the same time in the library, like what would happen there? Because ultimately, if you've got a true cross segment of the community inhabiting a space, regardless of what that space is, that there's bound to be some level of tension, perhaps even conflict. But I also think that there is moments of beauty that could come out of that, right? That yes, we might come to understand our differences, but we also might also come to understand the things that are similar to us, right? And so that has been the work. That has been the work for us to understand the public library as a site of encounter. The work that we have been doing is happening in Memphis right now, and it's happening across the 18 libraries that we have in the city. but it's really focused on one particular branch, and that is the Cossit branch. It is the oldest branch, and that's Cossitt. You can Google and see some of the things that are happening there. It is the oldest branch in the city. It was founded by Frederick Cossit in the late 1890s and opened shortly after that. It was really the site of a lot of really amazing things in terms of Memphis history. The library is located downtown, in the heart of Memphis, downtown, and it has a wonderful view of the Mississippi River. Really, in my opinion, one of the most amazing views you will ever see the Mississippi River in Memphis is on the backyard of this public library. And the library, for the first 50, 60 years, again, is sort of the heartbeat of the city. People are coming and using this library for lots of things, mainly for research and to get books and those sorts of things. The library at that time, though, also is segregated. So Black people have little to no access to this branch for the first 60 plus years. In fact, there is another branch about a mile and a half down the street that was the Negro branch. That was called the Vance Avenue Negro branch, where African Americans had to use. And what happens is in the spring of 1960, I'll back up a minute. Actually, in the spring of 1957, there's a lawsuit that is filed by the Turner family in Memphis to desegregate the public library. And that lawsuit doesn't really make it very far. And essentially what happens in the spring of 1960 is you have a number of sit-in demonstrations that are happening in Memphis in a number of public spaces, including libraries. And those sit-ins were done by young Black college students for the most part. And I tell that story because of this. I joined the team of Memphis Public Libraries in late 2016, early 2017, officially. And one of the first things that happened to me was I got to meet some of those individuals. I got to spend time with them. I got to break bread with them. And to be able to look them in their eyes and say, because of what you did as a young Black college student, I now, as a middle-aged Black man, not only lead this branch, but also lead up the process of reimagining this branch. Cossit Library for a number of years was suffered a bit of disinvestment. It had actually been on the chopping block. There had been repeated calls starting in the late 1990s to close the branch. People wanted to find another means, another way of using this branch. Hey, you've got this wonderful space. It sits on the river, has a pristine view. People aren't using it the way they used to use it. Why don't you just close it and put something else here? And that almost happened, except in 2016, through some really amazing funding that came in and some really great advocacy that was done. The library was given the necessary resources to begin to sort of rethink its role in the community. And that's where I came in. I paired with leadership, paired with some great designers and architects, began to help give new form, new thoughts around what this library can be. And I just want to show you a little bit of the work that we have done, the work that the library actually will be opening in just a few days. Unfortunately, against the backdrop of a pretty tense times in Memphis right now, which we could talk about perhaps a little later. But here is essentially what that work is looking like in Memphis right now at Cossit Library. So let me pull this up, and then I'll hand it off, hand it back off to Tom. But I do want you to sort of see what's happening. 1 second here. I've got. I'm going to share my screen very quickly.
Great.
There we go. Can everyone see that? Okay. And so we worked with this organization, a design firm, Groundswell, out of Philadelphia. They've done some really amazing projects in the city. And we came up with this really wonderful concept statement here. I'll read a little bit of it for you. It says, the new Casa Library upholds its longstanding tradition of serving the needs of local Memphians. Established on the ideas of providing free and open access to core knowledge and information, the library is expanding its mission to serve as an active and engaging community resource. Taking an experiential approach to learning, the Casa Library recognizes Memphis's diversity, talent, and strives to support a variety of interests through creative arts, dance classes, technology and programming workshops, lectures and discussion series, community-led art installations, performances, and more. And so the plan as it will unfold is happening in 3 areas: an outdoor courtyard area, an indoor first floor area, and an indoor second floor area. And I just want to give you a high level view of kind of what this looks like. So we start with our courtyard. Here we've done quite a few things. This entire space used to be just all grass, right? So it was just green. And then right here is the main kind of artery that runs through downtown Memphis. This is Front Street. On the other side of the library is Riverside Drive, and it goes right along the Mississippi River. And right here along Front Street, there was a fence that went all the way down this block. And so it was possible for you to walk by the library, not even know that a library was here. And so a couple of design things that happened, we removed that fence and we added some steps that brought you in here. We paved half of the green space and added a variety of seating. You can see there are chairs here, there are benches here. And we also added some lighting that, you know, kind of really to sort of catch your eye. And then we preserved half of the green space. And so this green space, we have some art here, but it's also a space for us to be able to do a variety of programming, to do outdoor Tai Chi, to do yoga, to do stretching, to do outdoor reading programs. And then this side here that is paved, there's just free seating, right? You've got these wonderful trees here. It's a really great space to sort of just people watch, if you might imagine. And then inside, we added a cafe. And this is not necessarily revolutionary for libraries. There are more and more libraries that are doing this. But there were a couple of reasons that we did this. And one of the reasons was, as we talked to the community, right? And particularly as we were trying to talk to people who knew of the library, but were not coming in or interacting with the library, one of the things that they shared with us was that, you know, hey, it would be great to have a place where I could do some work, I could read a book, and I could get some coffee, but I didn't feel like I had to get coffee to stay there, right? As we say, you know, hey, if I go to the coffee shop, you know, and I've only got enough for 1 cup of coffee, sometimes I feel like, you know, people looking at me kind of weird if I don't buy the second cup of coffee, right? And maybe we've all sort of gotten those stares as we've been in coffee shops. And so the cafe essentially provides a new means of attracting people who might not have otherwise interacted with the space. The cafe has a number of menu items, different price points so that everyone can afford to be able to get something here. And we also have a really interesting model where we have a few signature items that are a little more expensive, but the proceeds of those items go into a community bank and allow us, if someone, for instance, doesn't have enough money that day, to get something that we can provide something light, such as a sandwich or a cup of soup. We also have added some meeting rooms. The thing that we understand about the cafe is that by nature of putting in a cafe in the middle of the library, that you're now making it a bit of a noisy place, right? It's a place where people are laughing and talking and having conversation. And so there are some people, though, who still actually need quiet space, right? And so we've added some meeting room space for people to be able to study. I talk about that the sit-ins that happened here. You know, we had in 1960, we had the individuals who came to the library and did sit-ins, and what happened as a result of that is a trial took place that was tried by some very famous Black judges, Black lawyers in the city, and that ultimately led to the desegregation of the library system. And so we wanted to pay tribute to it. We want to always be mindful of our history. On the second floor, inside, we have a performance area. This is a multi-use space that can be a number of things. That it could be a space where we could do film screenings, that we could do concerts and those sorts of performances. But we could also do corporate gatherings. We could have neighborhood meetings here, right? And so we actually have in this space that's about 2,300 square feet, 10 different configurations of what this space can be. And again, that, having that sort of space allows us to be able to change very quickly. And then you will see, as you look at this diagram here, the number of spaces here, well, these are bookshelves. Yes, we have not forgotten about the books. That's often a question that I get when I make these presentations. Books are very, very important to us. But all of our bookshelves are now on casters. They're metal bookshelves on casters. They allow us to be able to move the bookshelves, to be able to transform the space fairly quickly. We've added studio spaces. These spaces allow for audio and video projects, so podcasting projects, voiceover projects, documentaries, indie recording albums, right? And everything that you need to be able to do to record, we have it for you. So if you need a microphone, if you need a green screen, if you need a laptop, if you need some software, if you need a camera, all those things we have available. And it's in much the same way you would check out a library book, you can also check out this equipment. And that has been very, very important. And then we have added a workshop space. And this doubles as both a co-working space in the daytime, but also a workshop in the evening where we can have a variety of classes around sewing and knitting and these sorts of things. And so, as you can see, and I'm wrapping up here, in our desire to sort of create a space where everyone feels welcome, we had to sort of begin to create the sort of activities and add the sort of amenities and resources that speak to the desires that people had in the community, right? And so as we went through that process, we also, again, completely changed up our books, our collection, our databases, and those sorts of things in a way that we think are now speaking to the community. I want to say kind of one last thing that as I backdrop this, and hand it back over to Tom, this work has, I think, become increasingly complicated. I'm sure you all have seen things around book bans that are happening at public libraries, at school libraries across the country. And so in our desire to sort of create spaces where everyone is welcome, we are now having to give very careful attention to what does it look like to hold space for people who have very different opinions. How do we bring people together in a way that protects marginalized people, does not put them in harm? And so I do hope that we will have some time to talk about that. I'm happy to talk about approaches that we're taking, and we'd love to have some dialogue around that as well. But with that, Tom, I think I should cede my time back over to you.
Great, Michael. Tom is going to come on in a little bit, but this next step that we're going to have is for people to have a chance. Our participants here, what resonated for you? Any thoughts about this last point that was raised about the times that we're in and book bans and controversies and different kinds of people showing up at, I don't mean different kinds of people, I mean people, because we're all humankind, but people with very different perspectives showing up in the library space. So that's this very provocative question that Michael has posed at the end. He's also shown us an amazing project with all kinds of wonderful things in it. So any questions you have for him, any comments, any appreciations, any insights? And I see Adine, yes, please. And about a minute each so that we can have no more than a minute each so that we can hear from as many of you as possible in the next 15 minutes. And you're on mute, Adine.
Okay. Thank you, Michael, for that inspiring presentation and for the work you've been doing. A question that came up for me, because there's some renovating of libraries happening here in Portland, and I'm wondering if you have encountered any interest at that library or any others of the library actually convening public dialogue, not open, and town hall things with elected officials, but for just convening conversations among the community members themselves, with facilitation or not. But has that shown up anywhere?
Thank you so much for your question, Nadine. And we're going to hold all the questions and come back to them when Shamichael will speak again. But thank you asking about convening public conversations. And Ramin, over to you.
Hey everyone, nice to be here. Shamichael, thank you for sharing that inspiring work. A few questions. I live in San Francisco in the Mission District. The library is just down the street. It's a beautiful old building with classic elements, but one of the challenges is become a catch-all for a lot of the missing services in the community. And in many ways, it maybe makes it feel less safe for typical users. You've got people experiencing homelessness that either are needing to use it as a bathroom or as a place to sleep, very understandably, but in ways that, again, can be a challenge for other purposes. So I'm curious about how much you encountered that in the Memphis context and any insights you have about that piece. I'll rattle off a few other questions. You named in the beginning an evocative vision of it being a meeting place or a gathering place for people from all walks of life in the community. And I wonder what you've learned about programming and invitations that are re-engaging the public or new aspects of the public. We'd love to hear about that. Another piece is the design is fantastic. And as folks with a participatory orientation to design, I wonder in what ways community voice was part of it and how to think about like the relative role of community voice compared to experts. Clearly there's a lot of expertise in architecture that can already arrive at some of these insights. And then finally, resourcing, how was this resource? I think in a magic wand world, we would all have money in our communities to transform our libraries this way. And I'm just super curious how this came to be and what visions are of how we could scale this work. That's a ton of questions. Thank you, Rosa. You don't need to reflect them all back.
I'm not gonna reflect them all back, but I did miss one. So you had spoken about social services, missing social services and homeless people was your first one.
Yes.
Your third one was about community input into the design, and your fourth was about resourcing, but there was a second one in there about meeting place and gathering that I didn't quite get what the question was.
Oh, basically what Shamichael has learned about offerings and invitation design, maybe that is working at re-engaging the broader public, all walks of life. So this feels like
what he's learned about how to re-engage people from all walks of life. Okay, awesome. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. James, over to you.
Thank you. The word that stuck out at me from the presentation was in one of the texts, there was the word engagement or engaging. And I'm wondering what makes me think of a building as engaging, and also what does an engaging person look like? Because if I go into a library, I would want to feel that it was easy to engage with the people there. Those are the questions I've got, really.
Oh, beautiful, James. So what makes it a welcoming space where you feel like you want to engage, both physically and in terms of the people? Thank you so much. Anyone else? I'm not seeing any hands right now. These are great questions. Oh, Manju, yes.
Well, first of all, if I ever give another presentation, you have just given me an incredible way to do that, Shamichael. It was exquisite. So thank you so much. The questions are already so comprehensive and good, but I am wondering what level of city government participation and state government participation, if any, you had, and also national visibility with the library web national network. So I'd just like to add those two.
Thank you so much, Manju. Great questions. Natalia.
Well, I'll first say, I wish I had had that library in my life and even had it now as a musician. Having a creative space and a place you could actually rent equipment, which is so expensive and often incredibly prohibitive for recording, that would have been absolutely incredible. And having a cafe. I know that like people in my generation who so many of us are entrepreneurs or self-employed or contract workers, love going to coffee shops to get that sense of community while we're working on projects. And it can often lead to interesting discussions or working out ideas together, which I think can be so generative. So I love the inclusion of the cafe. I'm really curious about if there are any ideas about creating programs for children and their parents, because I know that kids are like one of the number one, demographics that uses libraries. And I think we got to teach them young, teach them about like nonviolent communication, mindfulness practices, how to engage in dialogue that's generative, embracing diversity, all of these, wonderful skills that if we learn them, if children learn them, who are basically our future, it seems like a wonderful opportunity to start to spread that energy and those ideas more broadly. So I'm just curious if there's any thinking around that or inclusion of programs along those lines.
Awesome. Great questions, Natalia. Thank you so much. Feel free to write, as some of you are already. Andy, you're taking great notes and putting it on the chat. Make sure that your questions are also in the chat so that we can help out Michael, make it a little easier for him to be able to respond to these many wonderful questions. We still have a couple minutes. So I see Nancy's hand and I see Jennifer's hand. So yes, go for it.
Yeah, wonderful presentation. We lived in Dayton, Ohio for a couple of years, and they had the most amazing library there I'd ever seen. It had the studios you're talking about. It also had a workspace where they had a thing computer, that transfits things, and you could print, great big signs and posters, and they had woodworking and so forth. So, and it just occurred to me, as I'm really focused on difficult dialogue and how we do it. A conservative I spoke with on this topic said, why do we have to talk with each other? Why don't we just do something together, like feed the poor, and then talk while we're doing it? Which made me think, if there's hands-on activities where there's space or focus for dialogue in and around the activities rather than on the issues, and then the storytelling and the deeper understanding may emerge from that. Yeah, and I'm getting a question about that from the moderate flank. I've been in some deep conversations with them in the UK, and they want to work in the States, but they said, you're so divided there. What are you doing about that? And could you send us resources? And of course, I immediately thought CII, but now I'm also going to think Shemichael and how we use our libraries. And there's money in the feds potentially. There's a commitment that's required by the UN called Actions for Climate Empowerment. And citizens created it in the US because Trump wouldn't. And it went to Paris. I mean, it went to, our next COP 26. And the thought was, but where do you ground it? And we've got the money potential. And I'm just now realizing they were talking universities, but that's not yet the community. Now I'm thinking libraries, a network of libraries that are mutually programming in this way, and it gets elevated so people see it and are inspired by that possibility. And I also was in on the democracy conversations for those 3 days that you did. So I'm terribly excited by what you're talking about, Shemichael.
Awesome. So there's 2 more hands. And before we go to Slow, there's 3 more hands. There's Jennifer, Slow, and Lloyd. And before we go to those three, I just want to say Kevin had put in some questions in the chat about wondering if there had been thought about creating a collective wisdom room in the library, kind of a sacred place to gather and discuss and have the public conversations. Charles had written, to what extent is the library studio pattern spreading and what sorts of results are being seen? Kevin offered another question, curious how Shamichael is interacting with the American Library Association and other library associations. And then Andy has been writing all of these wonderful questions up there. So Jennifer, you're next, and then Slow, and then Lloyd, and then we're gonna head back over to our guest presenter so he can begin to respond to some of these questions.
A lot of questions, so many questions. I just incredible appreciation and gratitude for what the work you're doing and what you're sharing here. And I'm going to highlight that the moments of tension and moments of beauty. I really love that. And the moments of beauty thing set me off on a little bit of a riff in my head, and also looking at sort of the work that you're doing and how, you know, in making people welcome, you're not trying to make a space. You're like, I'm just like reveling in the beauty of meeting a diversity of needs and a diversity of ways. And I tend to go to ecosystem models a lot, and just the sense of like, just this yearning for how can we find ways, you know, like we have in the pattern language, there's using diversity and disturbance creatively, but like there's this whole other level of like, how do we enhance and recognize and live into the incredible potential and beauty of our diversity, and like, yeah, like having a music space and having a cafe space and all of that, and like different things resonate with different people, and that's what allows everybody to come. And I sort of super appreciate that, and I just like would love to dig into that more. And I'm also thinking about schools and libraries both, like not so much universities, but K-12, and like other thing that's coming up for me is like the way. So I'm involved in groups that talk about like resilience, climate resilience hubs, and libraries as sort of civic hubs, and also resilience hubs, as well as the public encounter. Curious about all the different ways libraries can.
Whoops, we stopped being able to hear you there at the end, Jennifer, but I think you were wrapping up anyway. Okay. Slow.
Yes, thank you, Shamichael. That was a great talk on a great project. I would love to. The beauty of it being so visceral is like I want to go walk into it, right? It's just like and then you run into people and talk to them and whatever. It seems clear a project like this, you must have drawn like a lot of supporters as people understood what you were trying to do. I'm wondering, one question is just, were there opposers? Were there people who, upon realizing what you wanted to do, that they were worried about that, they didn't want that? That's one question. Another question is what was the, not necessarily the most famous, but like the juiciest or most interesting or whatever journalism covering all this, you know, over the last few years? And more generally in regard to journalism, I just want to check if you're familiar and if you thought and worked at all with the journalism or journalists in this whole process. Like there's solutions journalism, there's a project Journalism That Matters that comes to mind that would be really interested, I think. It's another field that is even more economically challenged than libraries maybe right now anyway, and that seems to have a lot of overlap. One in particular I wanted to call out, and I can send you a link if you're interested, is the American News Service, which was a news service covering exactly grassroots efforts, you know, to engage and make a change, you know, at all scales. So at the time, yeah, anyway, that's, I can send you a link if you're interested. Then the last question was just not much a question, as an idea, just libraries as non-mobile chautauquas. if you're familiar with the Chautauqua movement in America from the, I think, late 1800s, mid to late 1800s. I don't remember exactly. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Slow. Last question goes to Lloyd, the honor of having the last.
Well, Slow hit a lot of what I was going to talk about, but I will just put out one more question from that, and that's that the media has such a powerful hand in shaping communities' ideas of what's possible in civic engagement. And I'm just wondering if the local media, if you've been able to connect with some journalists that are paying attention to see what engages the citizens of Memphis. And then other than that, I'll just say thank you for just an incredible presentation. And there's just such wonderful energy around the Cosset Library. Thank you, Shamichael.
Awesome. So Shamichael, I just want to set you at ease that you are under no obligation to respond to everything right now. But hopefully there have been some questions that are inspiring you to say a little bit more about some of these areas. And one of the things I like to say is that I really hope that this is the beginning of a collaboration between you and CII. I certainly would be happy to, put the questions into a doc, possibly interview you to get some responses from you so that we can share that with people afterwards. So these next 15 minutes are not your last chance to inform, illuminate, and educate people here about all these things, but definitely take it away and please go where you want to with it.
Yeah. Wow. This what a rich set of questions. I'm actually. I think it was a couple of questions have come up around. Am I having? I think Kevin asked, was I having conversations with the American Library Association? And I am actually. I'm going to be hopping on a plane here in just a few minutes to head to New Orleans for a conference that the American Library Association is having. And if I'm honest with you all, I think the more interesting conversation is happening in this room. Probably, I mean, no knock against the librarians. It's going to be a great few days in New Orleans. But man, these are some really amazing questions. I'm going to put a few links in the chat just in case I can't get to everything. Things that I think may be helpful for you all to check out at some other time. The first one is this really wonderful book written by Eric Kleinenberg, came out a couple of years ago, called Palaces for the People. And he talks about things that were happening in the New York Public Library, and he seeks to connect it to this larger conversation around the need for a social and civic infrastructure in this country, right? That's sort of akin to the public. And some of this will kind of tap on some of the things that Raheem was mentioning when he talked about the library as a catch-all, right? Because that is absolutely happening. And the thing that came to mind, Raheem, when you said that, so on the back side of Cosset, like there's this front courtyard that I showed you all where some really great things are happening, but there's also a backside. And on this backside, you have this really wonderful view of the river. But in addition to the river, there are two bridges that go over the river, right? Both of these bridges take you out of Memphis, Tennessee, and take you into West Memphis, Arkansas. And I would spend so many days, like on my lunch break, just watching, watching people run up and down the river. There's a little park that's on the river, and you often see kids, tossing a ball or flying a kite or those sorts of things. And then you see these bridges, which had a lot of activity, right? I mean, one of these is the I-40 bridge, and that bridge is really responsible for, interstate commerce that's going across this bridge, ideas, people are leaving one place and going into another. And at some point, as I was watching that one day, it sort of popped into my mind that the library is a bridge as well. I've been probably a nerd my entire life. And the library was, as a teenager, it was this sort of place where I not only got to learn about, airplanes and athletes and those sorts of things, but it was also, and I think perhaps more importantly, it was the place that connected me to other people who also had those same interests. And I think that is one of the sort of intangibles that the library provides. That people don't often think about. People often think about their mind goes to books, maybe goes to some sort of story time for kids, but the library in its place to connect us to other people who have the same interests is really, really a powerful thing. And so some of that is you will see in Eric's book. The second thing that I'll put, because I don't have a lot of time, but I think this not only hits on sort of the role of government, because we are a government agency, not only hits on sort of the role that government played in the sort of day-to-day of this work, but also the government's funding of the work, and then some possible models that may go forward. And it also kind of talks about sort of how media view this. So last year, a couple of things happened for us. Number one, we received the Medal of Excellence from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which is the nation's highest honor you can get as a library. And Memphis now has the distinction of getting that award twice. We're the only public library that's gotten it twice. But the Smithsonian, this article, they dubbed us the nation's most innovative public library, which I think everybody, I've spent time in Seattle and New York and in small places. Like I grew up in a little small town, Alabama. Every library is innovative. So I think, it's just sort of their way of sort of creating a catchy headline. But in the article, there is quite a bit of attention given to the relationship that our library director has with the mayor and has with the state. And I think that is a very, very important thing to lift up, because I have to give all kudos to Keena McClure, who's the director of Memphis Public Library. She is a fierce and tireless advocate on behalf of the library, and is sort of always going about trying to secure resources. And then lastly, I will say, our work is connected to a much larger initiative, which is called Reimagining the Civic Commons, which I think may have been in some of the pre-materials. And the Civic Commons initiative is an effort that's being funded by some really great foundations, Knight, Kresge, those folks, to just rethink our public spaces, to think about how we manage, how we maintain, how we advocate for, how we steward our libraries, our community centers, our waterfronts, all of our public assets, right? And how we think about funding them in a way that can really produce some amazing outcomes for us. And so those will be very, very helpful for you. So I want to dive into a couple of things here. And as I go back to this sort of thought that I'm having right now around the library as a site of encounter, and as I think about Nancy's comment around this sort of talking as we do, and even Natalia's thoughts around like programming, right, particularly around kids and those sorts of things, I think that you all are onto something there, and I absolutely believe, yes. And I think this also ties into who had I think it was maybe Aiden that talked about sort of convening, right? So I came across a couple of years ago this really wonderful framework that had been developed by some folks at the American Library Association. And it was sort of a way of building out and categorizing library programs. Essentially, they had 7 ways that you could build out a program in terms of sort of outcome, right? So the first way was that you could build a program in which people who were a part of the program learned new knowledge, something that they did not know before. The second way of building the program was that participants learned new skills. The third one was that participants changed their attitudes about something. The fourth one was that participants changed their behavior towards something. The fifth one was that participants gained some sort of new understanding of what the library offered, some sort of resource, some program, some service that maybe the library had that they didn't know about before. Like, for instance, our library system with your library card gets you free access to all sorts of databases. Like for instance, one of them is LinkedIn Learning. It used to be lynda.com, right? Where you can just, you can sign onto this website and pretty much teach yourself anything. If you want to learn how to code, you want to know how to become a better photographer, you want to learn how to sketch, you want to learn how to do taxes, you want to start a business. Like, this website just has tens of thousands of videos on how to do stuff. And your library card gets you free access to it. You scan your library card, you get on this, right? And so this sort of programs where people learn something new about the library. The sixth one was something in which the participants was exposed to something new, right? Like, there was a new food, there was a new art form, there's a new language, there's a new culture that they learned about. And then the seventh sort of category was participants met or engaged in dialogue with someone that they would not have met otherwise. And so for us, we took that and said, okay, let's figure out if we can create a suite of 65, 70 programs that touch on these things, right? And in the process, let's see what happens. And we started doing that. We started doing some of it was very simple, like this, we would do a sewing class in which you learn how to put a button back on a shirt or on a jacket, right? Because how many of us haven't, buttoned up a shirt or a blouse or a jacket and the button pops and say, oh man, I don't know what to do now, right? And maybe not everybody, but there are some folks. Right? We actually turned that into what we call an adulting 101 for millennials who maybe didn't have sewing skills, right? But what we found was that those sorts of programs drew vastly different people who thought very differently about the world, who had very different upbringings, who lived in different parts of the town, different zip codes, right? And the program itself didn't produce a sort of kumbaya moment, but what it did do was it brought people in encounter with each other, this sort of light encounter with each other, right? One of the first things that I found when I got to Harvard was this psychologist who was here in the 60s, I believe. His name is Gordon Allport, and he wrote this book. Is my time up? I'm sorry.
No. Someone else is joining us.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. He wrote this really interesting book called The Nature of Prejudice. Let me see if I can find that and just I'll just drop it in the chat here. Gordon Allport, Nature of Prejudice. And it's a really wonderful book in that he talks about interactions, and he talks about the types of interactions that particularly in public spaces, there are sometimes when we have these very light interactions, right? Like we might just sort of bump into somebody that we happen to see them, right? And then we pass by them and there's nothing else there. But then there's sometimes these more heavier interactions where we actually are sitting down shoulder to shoulder with someone and doing a thing, right? And what we found with some of these programs, like the sewing program, is that as people kept coming, third and fourth time, people start saying, hey, I noticed that I see you coming to this program every week. My name is such and such, and I live on this side of town, right? And that sort of shared experience, I think, is so important that sometimes you can't really have those more deeper conversations if you don't have these initial relationships, right? And we have seen the power of how food and how music and the arts can do that, right? I'll give you another example. So I was a pastor for a number of years at a very large church. And one of the things that we would do during service, kind of towards the beginning of service, is we would have a meet and greet where the choir would sing and then the pastor would say, okay, hey, go find someone that you didn't come here with, that you don't know, and just introduce yourself. Tell them about you, tell them about why you're here, what you hope to get out of the thing today, right? And that always struck me. I said, man, because I always saw people, sometimes, they don't always remember people's names. I don't always remember your name, but I will remember, oh yeah, she went to the same high school as I did, but she graduated a few years before I did, right? And so that's always a really powerful thing. And so we did these outdoor concerts at the library. And for a long time, they were just purely sort of consumerist. Like, people come and sit down, they watch the concert and they leave. And then one day I said, you know what? Let me just stop this thing right quick. Hey, musicians, could y'all just pause for a moment? I'm just going to ask the crowd if they will just stop for a moment and get up and go find somebody they didn't come with and say, hey, why did you come to the library today? What was the first book you ever checked out? What are you reading right now? And it was this really beautiful thing of people started sort of, oh, okay, yeah. I know you. Yeah, we both read that Grisham novel, right? It was this sort of, thing where I think through doing that consistently and doing it well creates a sort of social capital for the library to then be able to have those more difficult conversations. And that, I think, is a really great opportunity for us. And it's some of the things that I'll be talking about at the ALA later in a couple of days here. I'm so sorry that I couldn't get to other things, man. I really want to. Yeah.
That's okay, Michael. This has been wonderful. And we can have you back. We can have a part 2. And at this point, I do want to pass the baton over to Tom for about 10 minutes. Tom, if you want to share something about wise democracy, pattern language, patterns that you're seeing here, new patterns you might want to create. No pressure, but definitely over to you. And I think you're on mute.
Okay. What a challenge. This is all great, Michael. Yes, we could talk for probably 20 more hours, easy. When I had watched Michael's TEDx talk, I jotted down a bunch of patterns. I'm going to quickly go through them and then note another one I realized as we were talking, and then another one which needs to be a pattern that isn't. So I already discovered a new pattern here. The main two are just obvious. There's a spaces for dialogue and collaboration pattern. And all you folks, John or somebody could put in a link to the pattern list into the chat for folks. If you go there, you can look down this list and each pattern has a whole page about it. So you can scan the alphabetical list and go. So spaces for dialogue and collaboration is one. Obviously, library as space. And what it's for, this is the sort of thing that's being done here. And nurturing social capital, with the note that social capital has 2 dimensions. One is bonding capital, which is being with like-minded people and the kinds of relationships that you have there, and bridging capital, which is relationships with people who are different from you. And I hear in Michael the idea to have both of those. Both of those are being, here's spaces to connect up with people who are like you, and here's ways to connect up with people who aren't like you. And all of that is fabric of community, kind of. Generative interactions. There's lots of different interactions we can have, and to have, we're always interacting with people, with the clerk at the store and with the person we get into a fight with at the bar, whatever, we're interacting all the time. But generative interactions are ones where something comes out of it that's better than what you went in with. And that to have the library be a center for that kind of interaction, so that when you go into the library, you're going to have interactions, whether it's an organized thing or bumping into people kind of thing, that it's going to be something that's juicy that happens just because you went in there. Equity, obvious, the sense of respecting each other, knowing that there's some people that need some help up because the system is so, the way things are set up is screwed in a way that screws people in it, and to try and accommodate that in some way. And using diversity and disturbance creatively, my favorite of all my patterns, that most people try to move away from diversity and disturbance and to move into it, to lean into diversity and disturbance, and having ways to do that, having the generative interaction knowledge and methods and whatever to help do that. And I feel there's already a bunch of that, both in Co-Intelligence Institute and in Shamichael's world, that complement each other really well for that. Commons and commoning, to have the sense of creating spaces and resources that we all hold in common and needing to care for those. Felt agency, that's the last one of the ones that I gave him before, for people to feel that they have some agency, that they are living influential beings. And another one that I stumble on is context awareness is one. And the main point that, first of all, just being aware that there's things that are appropriate or inappropriate depending on the context, but also the sense that context is an active agent. People think of context as a background to whatever's going on. And part of the point of that pattern is context is an actor in whatever's happening. Context shapes what's happening, and being aware of context as having the power to shape, for better and worse, what happens in a space. And that library as active context. You come into the library and suddenly everything is shaped somewhat differently than it is outside, in ways that are generative, good, community building, whatever. And the one that I realized I don't have in the pattern language, that now that I look at it as like really vital, is shared experience. And that shared experience, many things can be seen, many of the things when you have a generative interactions in a wisdom council or something like that, there's a shared experience there, and that's great. But that shared experience as a result of something else, and the idea of shared experience as a context for all the things we're talking, all the other things we're talking about in the pattern language, the sense of shared experience. There's a pattern, I think it's in the other pattern language I sent you, Shamichael, the breaking bread together, is something like that, the sense of breaking bread. And it's not the bread that's important, it's the shared experience of that. And of course, food provides a really good way to create shared experience. So the shared experience is the pattern, and we can create that. So I offer those as different windows into the magic, the co-intelligent magic of what Shamichael is busily creating. Check.
Wow, thank you so much, Tom. Yeah, so we will definitely have Shamichael and Tom have the last word here, but before we do that, there's a little bit of time for a second participant go round. Anybody who didn't speak the first time, Celie or Fang or Sita, Precious, if anyone, Andy did not speak last time. Yeah. And then also after we open up the floor to people we haven't heard from yet, maybe there'll be some time as well for people who have, but who may have another, who we did hear from before, but who may have another thought to offer, either in response to Tom's patterns or in response to all the extra information and gifts that Shamichael shared with us. Over to you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michael. It's been really, really interesting. And I think a lot of the points that you raised made me think about some initiatives, the different aspects of different initiatives that I see here in the UK or in Europe, some innovative things that have been popping up here and there. And just, I'll put some links in because I don't know, that this is an opportunity for cross-fertilization as well between things that may be going on in the US and in Europe. But there's something in the east of London which is called Participatory City, which is yeah, it's a whole initiative around creating like maker spaces and having people on hand, like not necessarily a library, but like having disused shops as like civic commons where people can just come in and they'll have people there who are there to support them with any ideas that they might have for setting up a community initiative, and that they have like they're basically there to help catalyze community action and community participation, and they do all kinds of things from like cooking workshops and things like that. Any idea that anybody has, that they create that space for things to happen. And what else came to my mind? I just want to say that also I've been involved in community assemblies and citizens assemblies here in England. And the first place that I worked in was quite a poor neighborhood in the east of London, where a lot of the work that I was doing was with the libraries, that the people who kind of run the libraries. Yeah, I mean, they were kind of creating spaces where people from all different backgrounds were coming together and having not necessarily difficult conversations, but were kind of setting priorities for what they wanted their local communities to look like. But yeah, I mean, just to say that I'd be really happy to have future conversations and draw on any knowledge that I might have accumulated here in my work with you, and maybe at Tom as well at some point. So yeah, thank you, Shamichael.
Thank you so much, Andy. Sita, you had your hand raised earlier, and then I'm seeing Celie and Charles.
Yeah, thank you. This is really inspiring. I think one of the wonderings or questions I'm sitting with is one of the challenges with institutions, I think, is that they get, at one point they get fixed, and you know, people have this feeling that you can't change it. And I think we see that a lot with schools and with libraries, that there's sort of a pattern in place about how it is. And the embodied knowledge that you can make those changes or that you can shift those spaces is sort of not something that typically gets prioritized in like developing, you know, if you're developing people for the board or for engaging as employees of that space, that they feel an ownership and agency to actually make changes or adapt it as context change. And the environment you have is incredibly adaptable, and you know, it's beautiful to see how it can be repurposed for different things. But I wonder, have you thought, or are you thinking and putting things in place for, you know, 100 years out from now, when that configuration might need to be really different again, or whenever that time might be, how that kind of ethos of reclaiming and reimagining space as we need to is like part of the, that it's not seen as something that's just a fixed space that is this way and it will be forever. So they're wondering.
Thank you so much, Sita. Over to you, Celie.
I'm very glad to be here as a nerd and bibliophile also. I'm someone who worked in bookstores for 12 years and libraries for about 1.5 years. Just to say, I apologize if this has maybe been raised at some level and I just missed it in the conversation already. But I have tracked a bit of, you know, people in the professional librarian sphere in the US and Canada, and kind of their own like industry level publications reflecting on their experiences, and I've definitely noticed, you know, a number of people calling for just more training for incoming, for library staff to that entails this kind of work of skillful facilitation of convivial group space, and to have conflict de-escalation practices as part of required training as well, contending with the fact that these public spaces are becoming kind of, you know, sometimes one of the last available remaining kind of broadly open and accessible public spaces, and that they're going to receive people who are sometimes coming with, you know, different tendencies toward crisis. And so there needs to be a real, you know, an attention and a budget and a real looking at how to prioritize deepening that sort of education for people going into the library service sphere.
Thank you so much, Celie. And thank you, Slow, for writing down the gist of it about the facilitation of convivial spaces, and de-escalation skills is a very important skill for people who are hosting these library spaces. And yeah, I totally relate to being a nerd and bibliophile and all that. Over to you, Charles.
Thank you so much, Shamichael. It's just been wonderful to soak up what's going on there with you. And I guess, so I'm involved, I've been many years involved in sort of archiving, especially in music and sort of media, but just, I don't know what's the right question, but it seems that obviously the whole track of today is a lot around a place, a physical place and a physical gathering, but there's not really much separation anymore with digital. I don't know, I don't have a clear question other than I'm just curious what sort of learnings and sort of moving forward directions or outlooks there are in regard to the digital aspects. It's kind of very broad inquiry. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your question, Charles. Schmeichel is going to have a chance to do a closing bit in a bit, and so maybe he will respond then. Manju, you had another question that you had mentioned on chat about voice of the people as a simulation for healthy democracy. If you could say a little bit more about that. I wasn't.
Oh, you know, my brain is just going crazy at how Shamichael's project can engage civic engagement using what we already know really works to bring people together who have very different perspectives. And so I just thought, wouldn't it be incredible if healthy democracy could create a mini product for libraries that would engage with local government, not necessarily the big, long, expensive things that they do, but just to give people the opportunity to see when they get together, even with enormously different perspectives, if they get together for a purpose, with good process and good facilitation, which can be done on a local level for sure, engaging more of your community, right? That everything begins to change for those people. Just exactly what we've been talking about all of this time. And so then I thought about Stephen Cull's simulations with Voice of the People, a little more involved, needing a computer for everyone. And sometimes they take an hour to 2 hours to complete. But his research from the University of Maryland shows how much more like-minded we are on some of these enormous issues as a country. And yet there are sophisticated ways that separate us and put us into our separate camps. And these simulations really support our seeing in real time how much consensus we have and how brilliant we are, frankly. So Thank you. Yeah,
thank you. So those are two different possibilities. One is healthy democracy, and the Voice of the People. You mentioned a name associated with that at the University of Maryland.
Stephen Cull, Kull. It's NBC.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And I want to read one from here. Andy was seconding your question, Charles, he was saying that he was wondering the same about digital, especially when there are efforts to create privatized civic spaces like Zuckerberg's metaverse, right? So where do we get the public digital, and what role do libraries have to play in that? So with that, unless there are any other questions, I will return the floor to Shamichael and Tom to have a conversation on any of what has come up so far.
Go for it, Michael.
Again, another really amazing round of questions. There are two things that I can't hit all of. There are two things. So as I think about what Sita said and what Celie said, I think about sort of how the library must continue to iterate, adapt, change, be flexible, And I know I already gave you a couple of books, but there's another book that I've been reading, someone gave to me when I got to Harvard, called Companion to Public Space. I'll put the link in the chat. Mehta and Palazzo are the authors there. And there's this really, really interesting quote that they lift up that I want to read. And it says this: envisioning futures is a core role of urban composition. Built forms have frequently endured long past their initial purposes, builders, or even civilizations. And built compositions will be transformed by continuing urbanization, aging populations, migrations, and other consequences of climate change, automation, and the continued evolution of virtual worlds, and other emerging and unseen trends. Understanding how these forces may shape or reshape public space is critical to recomposing spaces that will serve us well during their long lives. Public spaces can be key components in tempering and adapting to these trends if our squares, streets, parks, and other public spaces effectively foster the formation of social capital, encourage physical health, engender a sense of belonging and stability, host peaceful political speech and protest, and provide a sense of convivial space. And it's kind of what you all have already said, right? That we have to, as a profession, begin to see ourselves like this. But we also, as community members, who our tax dollars provide for these spaces and care for these spaces, have to also see these spaces as is. Like, this may not always be the library that you grew up with, that I grew up with, that these spaces will have to change and have to evolve to meet the needs of our community. The digital space is something very interesting. That's probably a whole different conversation. I will say this very quickly. For us, we have always recognized the importance of providing access to technology, but also access through technology, right? Because what we have found, particularly in a space like Memphis, where there's high levels of poverty, whether there's high levels of digital illiteracy, that sometimes even if you give someone a computer or a tablet, or you introduce them to some sort of new software, if you don't teach them how to use that software and how they can use that software to empower themselves, then you really have done nothing, right? You just kind of pay lip service to them. Lastly, I will lift up one more quote that I came across some years ago from FDR, which says this: libraries are directly and immediately involved in the conflict which divides our worlds, and for two reasons. First, because they are essential to the functioning of a democratic society. Second, because the contemporary conflict touches the integrity of scholarship, the freedom of the mind, and even the survival of culture. And libraries are the great tools of scholarship, the great repositories of culture, and the great symbols of freedom of the mind. And it's such a beautiful thing. It has been good to be with you. I believe this work is not only possible in Memphis, but in every public library across this country. Yes, it takes great design. Yes, it takes funding. Yes, it takes great leadership. Yes, it takes well-trained and adaptable librarians. But in my TED Talk, I lifted up two things that I think absolutely are required of everyone else, because we can often point and say, what does the librarian should do, what should the institution do, but there are things that we as individuals should do. And two things are this. Number one, that when we are in these spaces, it is crucial that we offer belonging instead of other, that we have to, as Tom has already said, we have to recognize that we're in a space with people who are different than us, and that's okay, right? We don't have to convert people to be just like us. There's a beauty in being being in difference with one another. And the second thing that it requires is that for us to be collaborators instead of consumers, that we have to move beyond going to the library to get a thing and leaving to viewing ourselves as people, as agents, as entities, as souls that can offer something to that space. There is some gift, there is some skill, there's some talent, there is some ability that you have that can make your public library, the one in your community down from your house, a better place. And I think if we engage in that way, then we can see the space, this space, this wonderful, this beautiful public asset continue to thrive in our communities.
Thank you so much, Michael, for the wisdom, the inspiration, the vision, the energy, the experience, the deep listening and responding to everyone's questions. I know there's always more we can talk about, and I just, again, really, really hope that this is the start of a much longer conversation amongst all of us. Tom, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, there's a pattern called life enhancing enoughness. And I just thought of life enhancing repurposing. It's another pattern that needs to be born. And I thought when you said meeting each other in difference, and I went, indifference, isn't that interesting? It's like a new meaning for indifference. We are living together in difference. Another thought was the sense of people needing to learn how to use the computers. I understand that there was a kind of computer that was designed for distribution in the developing world, that kids, they were just given to kids, no lessons at all, and the kids figured them out. They figured out how to use them just by the interactivity that's built into them. And part of me was wondering, to what extent could libraries include having kids and youth teaching others how to use computers in whatever program happened to be created that had computers that people might not know how to use? Stick a bunch of kids in there and have them do some workshops ahead of time about how to help those crazy adults or older people use this stuff, and then set them loose. I don't know, it just occurred to me that's another repurposing kids. Not just empty spaces, but kids for community life enhancement. Anyway, it was just mind-boggling. I'm also going to send you some information about a project that was once in North Carolina, I think it was, across a bridge, where one side of the bridge was overwhelmingly Black and the other side of the bridge was overwhelmingly white, and the two communities on the east side of the bridge. And the bridge became a medium for healing those communities together through creating art and other things related to the bridge. And it feels like that. I'll send it to you as a case study in bridging in very literal sense. Anyway, yeah, I'm just fascinated by all the stuff that came out of this. So thanks very much for both what you had to offer and for being the inquiry catalyst that you proved to be by being here. Check.
James, you're looking like you might say something, and I'm realizing that we haven't heard from you. Okay. All right. And Shamichael just wrote in chat, intergenerational programming has been big for us. We paired the 1960s protesters with middle school students to interview each other, and it was an amazing program. Wow. Very, very cool. Okay, well, I heard that Shamichael needs to catch a plane, and so I'm thinking it makes sense for us to call the formal ending of this. And of course, we'll be around for another half hour if anyone wants to linger and chat about any of this. And Shamichael is then saying, I should pair those folks together again to teach computer skills. Light bulb moment.
Yeah, Tom's coming. Maybe, I should go back and cut up those folks again.
And Andy, did you want to mention Polis a little bit since you're?
Yeah, I don't know. I know you've spoken to Tom, but one of the tools that we really like is a digital platform called Polis, which is fantastic for finding common ground across divides. And it can be used completely anonymously. It could be set up in libraries on computers where people come in and give their ideas on really hot and contentious issues. So that could be something to explore.
Awesome. To be continued. Well, Shamichael, thank you again. And yeah, please come back whenever you'd like.
I will definitely do so. I put it in the chat. I think there is this, and we touched on it a little bit, but I would love to at some point come back and talk about this sort of as we are together in difference, and how the sort of book banning has come about, and how there does not appear to be a sort of landing spot there right now, that it's so divided and so contentious that I don't think at the on the ground level, as well as in leadership and people within ALA, I don't think we've quite figured out how to address that yet, but I think there's something within the pattern language that can provide a roadmap, and I would love to come back at some point in time and have that conversation.
Wonderful. Bye, Ramin.
Thanks, everyone. This was lovely.
See you,
Thank you,
Ramin.
Rosa, for hosting, Andy, Tom, Shamichael, everyone.
So
Nice to
have a
be
great
with you.
weekend, everyone.
Take care.